Meat in many ways has become the new commodity. We've seen it now being traded on a global scale. It's largely controlled by a handful of companies which have got outposts right across the world. But JBS is the biggest of them all.
You've probably never heard of the global food giant JBS, but chances are you're eating their products.
They would be our biggest producer of protein in Australia and growing.
The control they exert is enormous.
I think Australians would be horrified if they knew the truth about JBS.
JBS is a family empire built on corruption.
This is certainly one of the biggest corruption schemes ever revealed in the world. Hundreds of politicians receiving dirty money.
I think it will come as a surprise to a lot of your viewers that a Brazilian company linked to so many scandals has been allowed to come into Australia and expand in the way that it has.
From crimes against the environment to insider trading and putting workers at risk.
I really feel if I had have acted in the way that they have acted, I think I would be in jail.
Around the world, governments are holding JBS and its billionaire owners to account.
Fraud, bribery, other violations of federal laws. JBS...
We should have really started to clamp down on JBS, which has become a monster, if you will, years ago.
But here in Australia, JBS has been given the green light to grow.
You have to ask, what is going on? Why is that company so supported by our politicians?
These seas don't belong to JBS. They're not the Brazilian butcher's seas. They're our seas. And it's not theirs to destroy just for the sake of their greed.
Tonight on Four Corners, we investigate the rise and rise of the global food giant JBS. We examine how bribery and corruption has fueled its expansion around the world, including right here in Australia, where JBS is taking more and more control of the food we eat. Tammy and Stuart Jonas run a small piggery near Dalesford in regional Victoria. Late last year, they were blindsided when corporate meat giant JBS moved in on their industry.
I mean, I was gutted. I just thought, no, please not JBS take over our abattoir, because they increasingly own more and more of the slaughtering facilities in Australia. And that means they get to define the terms of what gets slaughtered, when, how much, and how much money they pay for those animals.
The takeover of pork company Riverlea gave JBS control of 3 out of 4 major pork abattoirs in southeastern Australia, making JBS the biggest pork processor in the country.
I think you'll find most farmers are concerned about these things. You'll hear some say, oh, but it's great, they, JBS own everything all around the world and they're very good at what they do. They're the experts in the field, right? But that's not actually what their track record is.
Why does that matter, though, to a farmer like you?
Because I don't want to process with a company that is actually corrupt. And yeah, I don't want to work in that system at all. Everything we do here is in opposition to that.
The Riverlea acquisition bolsters JBS's growing domination of Australia's meat industry. The company owns some of the most popular brands that end up on our plates.
From Coochie to Cottesloe, there ain't no mistaking. The taste it makes primo, Australia's favourite bacon!
If you walked down the street and said, who's JBS, no one would know. And I think, look, that's been clever in their sense. They've created brands within their brand. So where people may know it as a particular brand of beef by name, you know, an Angus cut or so on, JBS has not put their name out there as such to be known in the cities. But in the bush, everybody knows who they are.
JBS is a major supplier of supermarket giants and fast food chains like McDonald's. The company employs 14,000 people in Australia across more than 50 sites.
With what they do, the reach they have, you know, to trucking, to transport, to buyers, to operators, to plant people, to employing people, they're the biggest in our rural industry by far.
With an annual revenue of $65 billion, JBS is a powerhouse in food production.
It produces something like 13 million chickens a day, over 100,000 pigs and 70,000 cattle. That's each and every day. So that gives some size on the scale of this company.
The brothers behind JBS's world domination are two of Brazil's richest men, billionaires Wesley and Joesley Batista.
They have like many aeroplanes, they had houses, big houses in São Paulo. Joesley loves yachts. He just loves it. Wesley is very practical. In Joesley, he is the financial mind of the empire. He's more the mastermind of the whole story.
Their enormous wealth stands in stark contrast to the brothers' humble beginnings in regional Brazil. Their family empire grew from a small butchery founded by their father in 1953.
I don't think that they imagined they would become the biggest meat packer in the world, but they were very ambitious and very aggressive.
Business journalist and author Raquel Landum started investigating the Batistas 15 years ago when JBS embarked on a multi-billion-dollar global spending spree.
That was a time when they started to buy a lot of companies and we didn't know anything about them. So they were coming out of the blue.
JBS stunned the global food industry in 2007 when it snapped up the American meat giant Swift Foods. The deal instantly turned JBS into the world's biggest beef company.
Swift, let's make your meals.
When they arrived at the US market, the US press, politicians, and the competitors had the same feeling that we have in Brazil. Who are they?
The takeover of Swift and its subsidiary Australian Meat Holdings also made JBS the largest beef processor in Australia. From there, the acquisition spree continued.
At the time, it seemed a really good move. Here was a situation coming in, overseas company, plenty of money, obviously knew what they were doing, everything would be great.
For industry veterans like David Bayard, the scale and speed of JBS's expansion was breathtaking.
Just came out of nowhere. It was a terrible rapid rise. They brought Tasman meats, and then they started from there. In Tasmania, they brought King Island, Longford, and Devonport. They bought 3 abattoirs in Tasmania, which was quite a big junk of Tasmania's processing sector.
As CEO and president of JBS Swift, Wesley Batista often visited Australia, where he talked up their big plans.
You've spent all this money. Do you have further expansion plans in Australia?
A couple of weeks ago, we announced the Tasman acquisition. We definitely have intention to continue spending our business here in Australia.
Butcher and producer Craig Cook remembers meeting the beef baron at an industry event.
I remember it very clearly. I was part of the Australian Meat Industry Council and we were introduced to Mr Batista. He arrived in Brisbane and did a wonderful explanation of why they were coming. He said, "We want to feed the world." And we walked out of there all sniggling and sort of thinking, oh yes, okay, going to feed the world. But he was right.
There have long been questions about JBS's meteoric rise and where all the money for these acquisitions was coming from. Our investigation has uncovered how the company was able to gain its foothold here in Australia, fuelled by years of corrupt dealings in Brazil. JBS's dirty deals started unravelling in 2017 during a major corruption crackdown in Brazil.
There was a real momentum to fight corruption in Brazil during this period. That's when the corruption of JBS was revealed.
The prosecutors started to come after JBS. And then Joesley decided that he was not going to allow that JBS become bankrupted, that he is going to act first. He's going to act to protect his company and his family.
Joesley Batista. Mendonça Batista.
Fearing prosecution, the Batistas and some of their closest executives signed a plea deal. In exchange for immunity, they sensationally confessed to a massive bribery scheme, spending $150 million on more than 1,800 Brazilian officials.
This is certainly one of the biggest corruption schemes ever revealed in the world. The amount of money involved, the amount of people, individuals being bribed, hundreds of politicians receiving dirty money.
Especificamente aqui.
In a key admission, Joesley Batista told prosecutors that JBS's global expansion was made possible through bribery. He confessed to paying kickbacks to Brazil's finance minister to obtain billions of dollars in cheap financing from the public bank BNDES.
Se não fosse essa proximidade com Guido, teria saído do
não teria. Não teria sido. Não teria feito.
E com a rapidez que foi?
Não teria feito.
JBS wouldn't be so big if he didn't receive so many money from the BNDES. The company wouldn't be so big if it wasn't for the bribes that allowed these criminal contracts.
The main objective of the bribery of JBS, of public banks and pension funds, was to obtain capital to its expansion, to its investment. So it obtained capital in a very privileged condition. And through bribery, through political influence that this company had and its competitors never had.
When news of the scandal broke, protesters poured onto the streets and the Brazilian stock market went into free fall.
When you have the state absolutely defrauded by systemic grand corruption, this goes directly to the daily lives of people here in Brazil.
To settle corruption charges, JBS's parent company agreed to pay one of the biggest fines in global corporate history, $3.2 billion US. But the scandals kept coming. Within months, the brothers were arrested, accused of insider trading by selling down their shares in JBS before entering into the plea deal.
A vítima não foi só os acionistas da JBS, mas num contexto mais amplo, a vítima é o próprio país em que vivemos. na medida que os crimes abalaram também a confiança no mercado.
The Batista brothers were jailed for 6 months and banned from running JBS for 2 years.
When the arrest in Brazil occurred, which was around 2017, then that triggered the U.S. Department of Justice to begin an investigation.
Fraud, bribery, other violations of federal laws.
In the United States, politicians fired up over the implications of JBS's criminal behaviour in Brazil. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro was one of the strongest voices.
Their entrance into the United States is very, very interesting because it was really illegal. They entered illegally into our markets. What has been uncovered is that they have bribed, paid off Brazilian officials in order to be able to get the loans, to amass the capital, and then entered the United States and purchased, Swift, and then subsequently other companies as well, which has put them in the position of having enormous market power.
In October 2020, JBS's parent company pleaded guilty to US foreign bribery charges. An FBI investigation found it paid millions of dollars to corrupt Brazilian officials to obtain financing to buy American companies.
They were convicted in the United States in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It is all through bribery and illegal activity that they have managed to put themselves in the place of being one of the largest meatpacking corporations in the country and in the world.
Since the conviction in the United States, the CEO of JBS's Australian operations has been keen to distance the local company from crimes abroad.
Allegations of corruption and bribery, is that a big negative for the company?
The Batista brothers you mentioned are no longer involved in the running of the business in any way, shape or form. They are still shareholders. That's a true statement. What happened in Brazil is unfortunate and in no way reflects how we operate our business in the US or Australia.
But Four Corners has found what happened in Brazil is directly linked to the company's success in Australia. JBS's entry and early expansion here was funded by the cheap financing that was obtained by paying bribes in Brazil. The Australian connection to the bribery scheme was examined during an investigation led by Brazilian federal prosecutor Ivan Marques.
I don't know if it was we were stubborn, or I was just trying to see the truth and protect the interest of the Brazilian government and the people.
His team investigated how dirty money was funneled into international acquisitions, including JBS's entry into Australia through Swift Foods in 2007. That purchase was bankrolled with funding secured as a result of Joesley Batista bribing Brazil's finance minister.
Em março, mas o dinheiro não era suficiente para poder fazer essa aquisição.
Joesley Batista also confessed to another bribe that helped underwrite JBS's next move in Australia.
Esses 500 milhões, depois logo no ano seguinte a gente comprou mais 4 empresas, 3 nos Estados Unidos e 1 na Austrália.
Os recursos foram utilizados.
The funds were used for the expansion of JBS abroad, basically. Swift Argentina, Swift from the United States, and also companies like the Tasman Group from Australia.
If money from loans that were obtained illegally because of bribes were used to fund ventures in Australia, then the proceeds of those ventures are the proceeds of criminal conduct. It's the same thing if you robbed a bank and you took $5 from that bank robbery and you bought a lottery ticket. and you won $1 million, then the $1 million is subject to seizure as the proceeds of criminal conduct. Because if not for robbing the bank, you wouldn't have had the $5 and you wouldn't have bought the lottery ticket. So the same thing applies here.
Former FBI agent Deborah LaPravotte says the Australian connection to the bribery scheme warrants greater scrutiny.
Certainly, the fact that bribes were being paid at the time in Brazil that JBS was expanding into both the U.S. and the Australian markets causes a great opportunity for international collaboration between the Australian Federal Police and the FBI. And I think it would be beneficial to both, either to ensure that JBS isn't involved in criminal activity or to determine if they are, to what extent.
Brazilian authorities say they're ready to assist any Australian investigation.
If there are any interesting of the authorities of Australia to investigate anything like this, we are here and we are able to help.
The corrupt deals in Brazil have allowed JBS to tower over their Australian competitors. Do you think it matters that corruption financed their global acquisitions of Australian, American companies, other companies around the world?
I mean, I think it matters when corruption finances anything. And again, as a producer, I don't want to do business with a company that's known for corruption. Like, who does? And we don't have a choice, right?
JBS's crimes extend well beyond corruption. Journalist Andrew Wasley has spent years investigating JBS's environmental track record in the Amazon rainforest.
A lot of Brazilian beef farming is carried out in the Amazon, which is an incredibly important environmental area, as we know. And what we found early on was that JBS's claims in terms of protecting the environment and preventing deforestation didn't match the reality that we were hearing about on the ground.
We've been monitoring 100% of our suppliers to protect the Amazon biome from deforestation.
Despite JBS's pledge to protect the Amazon, it has been repeatedly accused of buying cattle raised on illegally cleared land.
Together for the Amazon. JBS.
From the work we've done, we've found that JBS's supply chain, its beef supply chain in Brazil in particular, has been repeatedly linked to deforestation in the Amazon and other areas.
Late last year, several European supermarkets dropped some JBS beef products from their shelves over concerns the meat was sourced from illegally deforested land. Shipping records reveal JBS Brazil is exporting similar tinned beef to Australia to be sold at Coles.
The receipts that the Bureau of Investigative Journalism obtained revealed that JBS was exporting quite large quantities of Brazilian beef through to Australia. I think Australian consumers should be concerned about this because they could be unwittingly buying a seemingly innocuous beef product from the supermarkets that could actually be linked to very serious environmental impacts thousands of miles away in the Amazon, which is the world's biggest rainforest.
The company's catalogue of global scandals includes food safety breaches and anti-competitive practices. JBS and its parent company have shelled out hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and settlements over price-fixing allegations in the US. On worker safety, JBS has recorded the highest rate of serious injuries of all American meat companies.
They exploit workers. They have more violations in the workplace than, on average, than almost any corporation. And they are exploiting their workers by creating an environment that is unsafe and putting workers at risk.
Four Corners has discovered JBS's appalling record in the workplace extends to Australia too. we've uncovered serious and repeated failures by the company to protect its own workers from injury and even death.
I just wanted to work, and I was only 17 or something like that, and I just wanted some money, and I thought the meatworks would be a good chance to get some money going and a good little start.
John Kiriona Hodge worked for JBS at its abattoir in Longford, Tasmania 6 years ago.
My little area was the gut room, and so I'd be in there with all the beef stomachs and stuff. And I'd have to empty them out, clean them out, get them all ready to be washed and turned into tripe.
The gutting room where John worked was an accident waiting to happen. The tripe often became stuck in the machinery after it was rinsed in a tub of scalding water. To dislodge it, John and other workers would climb onto the edge of the tub.
They'd see me on there, give me a thumbs up because they know what I'm doing. They know that I'm keeping it all flowing, and and all I was doing is my job and sticking to, trying to keep the production line flowing. Just being a company guy.
One morning in November 2016, John slipped and fell in.
My left leg has gone into the water, and I couldn't get out of the tub with myself, and so I couldn't pull onto this chain. The leverage I was getting wasn't enough, and so I had to pull my right leg in the water and then just walk a couple steps. But my gumboots are now filled with boiling hot water, and then I just start screaming. I climb out of this bloody tub that I'm in because I'm the only person down there, and I'm just ripping my pants off, and I'm screaming for water, and then this guy, good guy, he gave me water, but it was through a high-pressured hose, and so he just cartridged the skin, all the blisters on my legs, and then the bottoms of my feet were stuck to the concrete. It was rather brutal. It was messed up.
John suffered second and third degree burns from his feet up to his thighs.
It was a brutal time, and it just took away a lot. It took a lot out of me as I was 19 when it happened, and now for the last 5 years, all I've been doing is recovering and doing appointments and just stuff I didn't think I wouldn't have to do.
So JBS was fined $150,000 in the end.
A magistrate found JBS knew there was a safety problem and failed to fix it. John has received a payout of just under $500,000.
So you can see here where the water came up to.
Yeah, that's the line of the skin grafting. That's as far as they needed to graft, and it went from all the way there down, and this leg and my foot as well.
JBS was convicted of workplace safety breaches and fined $150,000.
But yeah, it's still very tricky. They've moved on. They've earned all the money back that they've lost on fines. They're all good. They're just they don't even think about it. It's brutal. Sorry.
You're right.
In February 2017, only 3 months after John's accident, a JBS worker in New South Wales was killed on the job.
I really feel if I had have acted in the way that they have acted, I think I would be in jail.
Heather Rancloud's son Warwick was working as a contractor at JBS's Karuna feedlot during bushfire season.
The sky was glowing red day and night. It was extreme heatwave conditions. It was dry, hot.
It was in these conditions that a JBS manager working with Warwick started clearing a paddock with a tractor and sparked a grass fire.
He didn't dial 000, as most people would do. He called Warwick to come back, and Warwick did that, went back, and this fellow wanted a fire break put in, and so he took his loader onto the edge of the paddock that was on fire to make a fire break, and the wind changed, the grass fire took off, it went under his loader, and his machine was engulfed in fire. The report that we got was that he had burns to 90% of his body. His lungs were damaged, and so it was not good. They said it was not likely that he would survive.
After 2 days on life support, Warwick died in hospital.
It's an absolute tragedy for us that is with us for the rest of our lives. But I feel it was negligence. That, for goodness sake, they shouldn't have been out slashing in a heat wave.
JBS was convicted and fined $300,000. During the court case, it was revealed there'd been 2 previous fires at the site, sparked in similar circumstances in the months leading up to Warwick's death. Despite the known risk, JBS kept no record of those fires and failed to train any of its staff around the danger. Have you received any support from the company since Warwick died, or even during that time he was in hospital?
Personally, I've only taken one call from JBS, and that was to tell me I could go out and pick up the burnt-out loader. That was the one call I had taken. I've had an invoice sent to them for the funeral expenses and the ambulance expense of taking him from Karuna to Tamworth to Royal North Shore Hospital, and just a refusal.
So they haven't paid for the ambulance bill?
No.
Morning.
G'day, Grace.
Richard. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Jared.
G'day.
Grace.
Pleased to meet
nice
you.
to meet you. Thanks for having me on board.
No worries.
Shall we get off?
Absolutely. No problem.
The open waters of Storm Bay on Tasmania's east coast are home to Australia's booming salmon industry and JBS's new frontier.
It's a very profitable industry because they get given these waters for almost nothing.
The salmon industry faces relentless criticism over its impact on Tasmania's waterways and coastal communities. One of Australia's most renowned authors, Richard Flanagan, is a fierce opponent.
Each of these fish pens is like a vortex of squalid filth. It's like a series of floating feedlots stacked on top of each other, And swirling around in this toxic toilet, fish shit and urea and ammonia are tens of thousands of salmon.
Last August, JBS launched a $425 million takeover bid for Huon Aquaculture, the second largest salmon producer in the country.
Why would a global meat company like JBS be attracted to invest in Tasmania's salmon industry? What's the draw card?
The salmon industry is seen as the really lucrative end of the protein production business. It's effectively unregulated. You get, instead of having to buy land to put your feedlots and sow stalls and battery hen farms in, you get given the sea to destroy. It's a great racket to become part of, and they see it as part of a global strategy. They want to get into aquaculture globally, and they've expanded out from beef into chicken and pork, and I guess this was the last part of the jigsaw puzzle for them.
I thought there's about 20.
JBS's announcement it was moving into fish farming for the first time sparked vehement opposition from locals, including businessman Jared Castles.
Because we were saying, well, OK, they're growing that here, but they've got to get the food out.
We just knew them as the Brazilian butchers. And I was shocked to hear that they were interested in buying Huon. I couldn't work it out. But what was more shocking for the local community here was the fact that they had a record in Brazil and the US that pointed to corruption. And we found it shocking that they would be allowed to expand their business in this tiny little island called Tasmania.
The takeover bid was the first major test for JBS Australia since the corruption scandal. The company needed to win approval from the Federal Treasurer and his advisors at the Foreign Investment Review Board. Their role is to assess corporate character and Australia's national interest. But the process is notoriously opaque. From the outset, JBS appeared confident.
The Foreign Investment Review Board have always done a very, very good job in Australia. We've had a very good relationship with them in the past. We think we are a very good, strong corporate citizen in Australia. Our track record in Australia is beyond reproach.
Environmentalists disagreed.
They're Brazilian butchers plundering the planet's resources, and they're coming after our cheap marine real estate.
People are shocked and people are very nervous about how the Tasmanian government is going to stand up for our marine waters to a company which has got a terrible track record with environment and corporate law.
In the corporate world, billionaire and Huon shareholder Andrew Forrest tried to block the sale and launched a national media campaign against JBS.
I say to JBS, will you commit to removing the environmental negatives which currently exist with salmon farming in Huon?
But JBS's opponents were up against a company that's long enjoyed close political ties.
It's great to be here at JBS Australia. This is a very important business.
There's a lot of issues we're facing. We talk to government all the time. We're very reliant on government to address the key issues that affect our industry.
JBS has been schmoozing Australian politicians for years.
I know that JBS has a really proud record, not just in this state, but in Australia.
In Canberra, the company also has its powerful lobbyist, former Nationals Director Scott Mitchell.
I think they're very well connected politically, and when you see them floating around the halls of Canberra, you really wonder how much power they've got. They haven't got their lobbyists in there, all the time for nothing.
While JBS worked its political connections, its expansion bid won support from within the federal coalition and Tasmania's government.
I'm hopeful, based on their previous experience with FIRB, that we will see them as a business entity on this island.
But you're supportive of them getting that Foreign Investment Review Board tick?
Yes, I am.
It would be hard to argue that on the basis that JBS have a strong footprint in both this state and across the country, that it's not in the national interest for them to purchase or be allowed to purchase the shares in this particular company.
JBS is a company under investigation, under serious questions in many countries, except Australia, where they seem to be encouraged and supported and where no powerful person seems willing to say anything against them. And you have to ask, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why is a company with a history of industrial levels of corruption, why is that company so supported by our politicians?
Yeah, I think you've got to put this in context.
One of the politicians approached by JBS was Federal Agriculture Minister David Littleproud. The minister told Four Corners he had a brief phone call with the CEO of JBS about the plans and told him it was a matter for the Foreign Investment Review Board. David Littleproud was also asked about JBS's bid on ABC Radio.
Do you worry about the food system in Australia if a company of that kind dominates Australian food so much and then ultimately fails?
Well, that's obviously what will be taken into account by the ACCC and the Treasurer and the FIRB board, obviously. We also got to understand that this company also employs a lot of Australians. So, obviously, we've got to get the balance right.
The decision was made by Treasurer Josh Frydenberg late last year to approve JBS's takeover of salmon producer Huon Aquaculture.
Our future, our coastline, our future, our coastline, our future.
Community activists were outraged.
It's not hard to find out about JBS's history. How do you view the Foreign Investment Review Board or FIRB's decision to approve them?
It was a political decision to allow JBS to buy Huon Aquaculture. It was always going to be a political decision, and everybody I spoke to about saw it as a chronicle of a death foretold. There were no one was surprised.
The Treasurer did not answer Four Corners' questions about the decision.
It showed that the FIRB effectively is not doing its job. If, given the history of JBS with environmental deforestation in the Amazon, with corporate damage in the United States, with bribing politicians, if a company like that was considered to be suitable to set up shop in Australia, it shows how bad the FIRB has got to.
JBS declined Four Corners' interview request and said it's a proud Australian corporate citizen with a strong brand and reputation. JBS today is still very much a family business. While the Batista brothers are no longer on the board, they remain the company's largest shareholders by far. JBS's Australian operations are now overseen by Wesley Batista's son, Wesley Jr.
When you have companies that the whole business model is based on dishonesty, in corruption, it's a much more challenging task to actually transform it in an honest, ethical company. And this case will need years and also needs a lot of pressure from authorities, from consumers, from investors to really make sure that this type of company that goes through systemic corruption really transform its practices.
These seas don't belong to JBS. They're our seas. They belong to the Australian people and to all the creatures that live in it. And it's not theirs to destroy just for the sake of their greed.
Be wary in Australia. I would not trust them with a fragile environment anywhere. They have demonstrated their willingness for corruption, pollution, and just illegal activity that puts the public at risk at so many levels.